Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Today's topic is the koala's gum tree home, all about eucalyptus. And it will be presented by our fabulous NatHab expedition leader, Nicola Sentinella. Nikki, thank you so much for being here today and for bringing us such a fun topic. Let's go ahead and jump in.
Thanks, Sunny. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name's Nikki or Nicola. I'm an expedition leader with Natural Habitat Adventures. I'm currently in Canada, studying up and getting ready for another polar bear season. But my home is Australia, and I also guide down there. And I'm going to introduce probably the most iconic tree landscape for Australia, which are our gum trees, as well as talking a little bit about the koala, which is the main kind of focus for eucalyptus trees. They have this beautiful symbiotic relationship. So we'll jump on in. And yeah, as I mentioned, I'm an expedition leader for NatHab in both Canada and Australia at the moment. I'm also a conservation biologist. So I studied throughout Australia and did quite a number of studies throughout different ecosystems, from desert ecosystems to coastal, and also looking at a bunch of eucalyptus or sclerophyll forests as well. So I'm no stranger to the eucalyptus tree, and I'm excited to introduce you guys to the kind of different world that they can encompass and what makes them so unique and so iconically Australian as well. So they are like, if you ever see a silhouette or a landscape of Australia, chances are there's going to be a eucalypt in it. They include the tallest flowering plant in the world, and I'll introduce that Eucalyptus regnans later. And as we know, they're an important / pretty much the only food source for koalas. They're also a vital habitat for a lot of different species. So eucalyptus forests throughout Australia make up majority of our forested area, which means they're the primary habitat for majority of our species. And they support those different species in a number of ways. And we'll look at a couple of different species that call our eucalyptus or gum trees home. The other thing they are known for, and they've become quite synonymous with, is their capacity to burn and be part of a bushfire ecosystem. So I will talk a bit about fire ecology today. I will have a little look at the Black Summer fires that we had in Australia in 2019 and 2020. I understand it is bushfire season in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment. I'm here in BC feeling it. And so if this is a sensitive topic for you as well, I'll let you know when we start if that's something that you may not want to be faced with today. Totally get it. The eucalyptus is also used quite a lot in industry, and it's made it all across the world. We see eucalyptus from Portugal to California and everywhere in between. There are eucalyptus plantations in over 95 countries, and so it's become a really big part of kind of the global conversation as well, with uses including forestry, eucalyptus oil, as well as some delicious honey. So these are just some of the topics I'll touch on today. But as I was saying, they are kind of the main forest system that we see in Australia, and it hosts so much life. So this is quite a cool, temperate eucalyptus forest, and you can see that we're getting this amazing host of epiphytes. We've got orchids and ferns and mosses and a whole array of bird life that live up in the canopy on these trees, using these just sort of as structures in order to use up the space underneath the sheltered canopy in this sort of area. So we talk about eucalyptus trees. I'll usually say eucalypt. We do actually have 3 genera of eucalyptus, so of eucalypt. So there's Eucalyptus, Angophora, and Corymbia. Angophora only has 9 species. Corymbia was part of eucalyptus until about 1990. So generally, we just call all of them eucalypts. We may also call them eucs because we're Australian. We don't want to use more than one syllable if we don't have to. And then also gums or gum trees. And that name comes from the sticky sap that comes out of a lot of the eucalypts, and it is that sort of gummy texture. And that's where gum tree comes. There's currently 860 recognized species of eucalypt, so they're very diverse. All of them are found in Southeast Asia and Oceania, and majority of those are in Australia. So 700 species or so are endemic, are only found in Australia. So Australia really is the home of the gum tree, and that's where we'll be focusing today. They're kind of characterized, I think, by these leaves. So these gum leaves, these eucalyptus leaves, have this beautiful kind of leathery texture. They have this sort of bluey, green, almost desaturated color, which is like this glauca color. And to me, whenever I see that color, it does remind me of the gum trees back home. And they do have this drooping habit, and this is really deliberate for the gum tree. This is a way that they can conserve water. So knowing it's going to be pretty hot during the summers in Australia, especially when we have low rainfall, the eucalypts have adapted to make sure that they're not exposing this large kind of sail leaf structure to the searing sun every single day. So by hanging vertically, they're able to just get the morning and afternoon light, and they're going to avoid the harshest part of the day. So this is a really deliberate adaptation to save water. It means that their stomata, their little pores that breathe and release water, are also not getting exposed. And they're covered by this waxy cuticle, which gives it that sort of bluey color. And that also prevents water from escaping when they don't want to lose water when we're in between rainfall. So very adapted to low nutrient soil as well as low water availability. And these sort of pendulous leaves are really iconic for the look of the eucalypt. The other thing that we may see when we see a eucalypt tree and kind of recognize it as such are their beautiful flowers and their seeds. So this one is a Corymbia bicofolia. I won't know all the species, but I do know this one. This one is a Western Australian species of eucalypt, and it is the most common ornamental gum tree, and it's called the red flowering gum because, believe it or not, it has red flowers and it's a gum. And because of these big showy blooms, it's become really popular to place in gardens. It has been bred to be slightly different colors, ranging from pink to like a really rich orange. And this kind of shows the blossoms that we see on the eucalypt. These trees are really nice because they like to bloom down low. A lot of our eucalypt trees are very tall trees, and sometimes we can't see those beautiful showy blooms because they're right on the very top of the canopy. And that's where a lot of species like to hang out, like the little bee that we can see here. We also have a lot of birds, as well as smaller marsupials like possums and gliders will drink the nectar from these blossoms, but often quite high in the canopy. So it's always worth, if you're walking through a eucalypt forest, keeping your eyes up on that upper canopy and seeing what life is up there. But these guys like to show a little bit lower, which is lovely. So after they flower, they then produce their fruiting body, and this is their fruiting body. We call them gum nuts. And gum nuts are also like quite an iconic symbol. My primary school, where I was growing up, that was one of the logos of my school, was a eucalyptus leaf and a gum nut. And then this is where the seeds are held. And so these seeds will be held until either they're dropped through or they're broken open by fire, and that fire will help to germinate these seeds. The gum nuts have become quite a popular image throughout Australia, and that was thanks to May Gibbs. So May Gibbs was an Australian artist, and she produced this beautiful series that really popularized eucalypts and gum nuts. So these are her gum nut babies. And she also produced a book, as well as became a bit more of a series of Snugglepot and Cuddle Pie. And so that's something that I think if you talk to a lot of Australian kids, this is something that they will relate to. I remember having this as a picture book when I was growing up. And so this really made gum nuts and eucalypts part of the Australian identity, coming through in Western culture and displayed through our art. And it wasn't always the case. When the Western kind of artists first came over in the late 1800s and then into the early 1900s, The trees themselves have this really open, gappy appearance to them. They let the light through in what I think is a very beautiful way, but it was actually quite hard for a lot of Western artists to capture. It's not like a full deciduous tree that we would see. It's not like any conifer or pine or spruce. And so it was hard for people to capture that. And there was a push by the Australian government to get some artists over to try and encapsulate what a eucalypt really looks like and try and sort of sell that to the world when they were trying to get people to move in the early part of Western settlement in Australia. Hans Haysen was one of the artists who did that really, really well, and he has a beautiful series of Australian landscapes. And you can see in this picture in Droving in the Light, the way that that early light comes through the trees. And that really made the eucalypts a lot more attractive, I guess, in the Western eye after a while. We also had a few songs that went around. Home Among the Gum Trees was one of them, and Kookaburra Sits in the Old Gum Tree. So little nursery rhymes. It really has become part of the Australian identity. And the one creature I think that we most commonly think to look for in our eucalyptus trees are our koalas. Now there's two images here and there's 3 koalas, so I wonder if you can spot them all. And the koala are a marsupial. They're the largest of our herbivorous marsupials, and they will nestle up in our eucalyptus trees. This is their main food source. This is their only food source, really. Every now and then they might get a little bit of something else, but this is the primary food source, and it's what the koala has adapted to eat. So here's a closer look at this sleepy fella. So this is one of the koalas from our southern expedition, and this one is kind of tussling around in the heat. Generally, I can tell just by looking at this photo, it was a hotter day because we've got the koala is kind of spreading out its limbs, cooling off, letting those pads of its paws cool off, and isn't really hunkered down and sheltered from the wind. So the koala is a marsupial, which means it's a pouch mammal, and they are most closely related to the wombat. And you'll kind of see that in the big nose, as well as the really sturdy body structure, as well as a hardened plate on their backside, which I'll get to in a moment. The koalas are often seen dozing around in the trees, and that's because they need to sleep off their diet. So their main diet are the gum tree leaves, and these are full of toxins and oils. And so this is where we get our eucalyptus oil from. This is also what makes them very flammable. And it also means that other herbivores don't really want to eat the eucalyptus. It's not very palatable, it's very tough and leathery, and the toxins will build up over time. However, the koalas have adapted over a long period of time to realize that there is an abundance of eucalyptus leaves and therefore have developed the ability to digest the eucalyptus leaves. Now, with that means that they have to do a lot of processing to get that through their liver. And as they're breaking down those toxins, they do need to sleep for most of the day. So koalas can sleep up to 20 hours a day. So if you thought you had a nice nap today, as I did in the morning, these guys will always beat you. And they really only spend the rest of their time eating, very occasionally moving, and then only up to about 15 minutes of social interaction. They're quite an asocial animal. They generally will get to a tree that they like, and they'll set up shop in that tree, and then they will stay there until that food source is depleted, and then they'll move on to another tree. So because they're spending all of this metabolic energy to digest these leaves, they're going to be spending a lot of their time sleeping and conserving their energy as much as possible. They can move around, they can be quick if they need to be, but generally they're pretty slow. They do move through the trees really, really well. You can see this guy looks like he might just sort of tumble out, but actually feel quite safe and stable on the trees. You can see the claws here, really, really curved. They're really hooked and well adapted to climbing. You'll also see on the front paw on this one, we have 2 thumbs. So they actually have 5 fingers, 5 digits like us. They have 2 on one side and 3 on the other on their top paws. This allows them to grip the limbs of the trees really efficiently. And then on the bottom paw, which you can see on the right side, we've just got the 1 thumb. And if you look close, they are 4 digits, but the second and the third, the third and the fourth are nearly fused, and the claws themselves are really closely joined together. This is used as a grooming claw, so they're able to really get in behind if you have that little itch that you're trying to get. And watching a koala scratch right on its back is pretty impressive. You don't really think of them as kind of athletic, flexible creatures, but they've got an itch, they will scratch it. So they also have this plate, this sheet of cartilage that extends on their back. And this allows them to rest in trees for this 20-hour nap that they're having. And they're able to kind of nestle in against that cartilage. It means that it's now protected. It's a little kind of seat cushion for them, and it doesn't restrict any blood flow or any processes that are happening like their ever active digestive system. So even on a tiny little limb, the koalas are able to make it look quite comfortable, and that's because they've built their own little armchair for themselves. And here you can see just another little look at those claws really, really hooking in. They will be sitting in these trees for majority of their life. They live up to 13 to 18 years in the wild, and their fur is one of the most well insulated and resilient furs of any marsupial. So it looks beautiful and soft. It can feel a little bit kind of wiry and carpety, and that's just because it is just so thick and will really readily, it will reflect the UV rays. It will deter any wind or rain from their back. And so if they're ever cold or if it's quite windy out, you'll see them hunkered down in a ball and they'll really expose that back fur. On their belly, they're generally a little whiter, and that white helps to reflect the solar radiation, another way to keep them cool. They've got a nice big nose, but their nose is about as good as ours. It's pretty average, but it is honed in to smell those eucalyptus leaves. And they can smell the different oil content and toxin content of individual branchlets on the trees. So they can go around and they say, you may see 2 trees and they look great. And there'll be all the koalas in one and none in the other. They know something that we don't. And they'll be able to smell whether or not those specific leaves are more palatable to them. Their digestive tract is going to be working overtime in order to break down these tough, leathery leaves and also break down all those toxins. And I'll come back to this guy in a moment. And the way that they do that is their digestive system looks a little bit different to ours. So this is a carnivore, this is a coyote digestive tract, and then also a koala. Humans are relatively similar in the size of their cecum. So the biggest difference here is the cecum, which is this organ in the middle in that sort of orangey color. And the cecum is really, really reduced. In us humans, we barely have it. A lot of carnivores don't really have it. It doesn't perform that much of a function for us in humans compared to a koala. So the cecum in a koala, now bear in mind koalas are, and I've got this in both, but they can be up to about 85 centimeters tall, which is about 33 inches. And they can weigh up to 15 kilos or about 33 pounds. The cecum in a koala is around, depending obviously on the adult size, 200 centimeters long, 2 meters long, or 80 inches. So it is a really, really long organ that's curled up in the digestive tract, and it's up to 4 inches in diameter, so 10 centimeters. And this cecum is doing a lot of the work to break down those toxins and mainly the really tough cellulose of the eucalyptus leaves and extract any nutrients that it can get. It's a really low nutrient diet, but there's no competition up there because no one else wants to eat them. So these eucalyptus leaves can take up to about 100 hours in the gut before they pass through. And this will be a continual process. You'll see koalas won't really necessarily have a feeding time. They'll continue to feed throughout the day. And that means that they will continue to lose droppings throughout the day as well. So the one thing you don't want to do is stand under a koala with your mouth open, looking up in awe or amazement, because you may just get a little eucalyptus surprise. That said, the koala droppings are the nicest poop I've ever smelled. And I have had guests smell it and they've all agreed with me because it's so dry and it's just eucalyptus. It just smells like eucalyptus oil. That's it. There's nothing else in there really. They take all of the water content from these leaves and digest that, and that's how they get all of their water. The name koala itself comes from a Jurag word, which is like kula, which means no water. And so it's an animal that doesn't really drink water. Now, if it's really, really dry, if there's just been a bushfire, if there's not many leaves available, they have been known to drink from water sources, but generally they're able to extract enough water from these leathery leaves to sustain themselves. And that water is also stored in the cecum. So the cecum is a really important organ for them. This guy is a male, and I can tell you it's a male because we can see a scent gland just on their front chest there. The males will use this scent gland to mark trees when they move to a new tree, and that will tell other koalas that there's a guy up there, whether it's for mating, but usually for a territorial kind of show of dominance. We have some koalas that will stay put in one home range, and we have other koalas that are more transient and they'll move around. Generally, the females and the really dominant males get to stay put, and then the younger males will generally need to move around and find a place for themselves. So this was a lovely male who was very kind in coming down onto one of the railings as we were doing one of our hikes, and just the best shots, and we were able to just watch and observe this koala until he decided to move off, and then we could pass through the path. This is a little joey at one of our reserves that we visit down in Kangaroo Island, and you can see this one has quite a dark colouring. So the koalas can range in colouring from like a rich chocolate brown to a sort of ashy grey, and anywhere in between, but generally that front's going to be very light, maybe a little bit mottled, but generally quite light. So these koalas have really adapted to being in the eucalyptus trees. This is really their only habitat. They don't have many predators. There's not many things that are going up there. Not many things want to eat the eucalyptus leaves themselves. You may get dingoes and pythons if they happen across one. Maybe for the young ones, a bird of prey may take a joey. But generally, they don't have many natural predators. So they've got a pretty nice life, munching on leaves and sleeping 20 hours a day. I wouldn't mind that sometimes. So these eucalypts are really part of that iconic look of Australia. This is just a river gum on one of the rivers down south where I was doing my fieldwork. And they just have these beautiful kind of branching, twisted habit that I think is just so emblematic of Australia. The other thing that we do associate our eucalypts with is fire. So I talked about the oils, and the oils really make them very flammable, as well as a few other adaptions. Now, this isn't some fatal flaw of the eucalypt where, oh no, it's flammable. This is a really important part of the Australian ecosystems, and fire is really important throughout Australia. Many of our species need fire to reproduce. About 75 or 3/4 of our acacia species need fire to germinate their seeds. So a whole host of plants wouldn't exist without fire. And that dynamic as well creates different habitats for a lot of our mammal species to survive, as well as our reptiles and insects as well. So fire is a really important part of Australia. It has been a worked like actively worked relationship with the first Australians for over 60,000 years, in which First Nations people would use fire for hunting, for field management, as well as creating fire breaks against wildfires as well. So there has been a relationship there that has been going on for so many generations. But now with new techniques, with people settling in Australia, and as well as the exacerbated effects of climate change, the fire ecology landscape is changing, and it's changing at a rate that is something that is hard for a lot of our species to keep up with. So I'm going to jump into some of my experiences in the Black Summer Fire, and I will talk about how fire has regenerated as well. Again, I know that we are in bushfire season right now, and so if this is something that may be a bit kind of raw for you at the moment, I 100% respect that, and I recommend coming back in about 10 minutes or so. But I'm going to jump into some of the adaptations that our eucalypts have for fire in their native environment. This is a picture of the landscape after the Black Summer fires. I was going from Sydney to Melbourne for work, and I was road tripping down the coast. And this was about a month after most of the fires were declared extinguished and the roads were open. Before that, most of us were not traveling around as much as possible. We would never want to kind of be on the roads. And this was a stop near where I used to go every summer as a child. And to see the fires so recently burnt was yeah, it was quite impactful, definitely. So this is near Pebbly Beach. Pebbly Beach is where I used to go every summer until I was about 7. My mum had me, her water broke at Pebbly Beach and had to go to the local hospital. So it's very near and dear to my heart. And so it was really quite eerie to go to Pebbly Beach after the Black Summer fires and just see how quiet it is. I think that was the most eye-opening part of it, was just everything is very quiet. You're not hearing birds, you're not hearing insects. But already after 1 month, we were starting to see signs of life. During the following 2 summers, I also did some reptile recovery surveys, and I looked at how reptiles recovered throughout the Black Summer bushfires. And so I've had a nice, quite personal look at how the fires have rejuvenated after such a big event. And the eucalypts are very well adapted to it. So this is just down the road. This is at Tumbarumba. This is a pine plantation. And you can see here, it doesn't really show the same signs of rejuvenation. These are not native trees. These are for a plantation for timber, and they don't really adapt to fire at all. We compare this to just down the road. This is Tumbarumba as well. This is a eucalypt forest, and we can see there's already a lot more life coming through. So there's a few different processes that happen after a fire has gone through. The first one we can see here is this beautiful blanket of bracken. And this is the succession that we get after a fire. So after a fire, we now have a lot more light coming through onto the canopy floor. We're also activating any residual seeds from various different trees, shrubs, grasses, ferns, whether they're cracked open by the heat of the fire or activated by the chemical components in ash. Bracken is one of the first things to come up, and it is a pioneer species that comes up and it creates a nitrogen fixing environment. It's able to take in nitrogen and put that into the newly depleted soil, and it actually creates an environment for a lot of the other species to come up. So it's one of the first species to come through, and it paves the way for a lot of other species to then grow up through that fire succession. Now, the big thing that eucalypts do is a process called epicomic growth, and it's what a fair few trees will do if you ever cut them back, if you prune your hedges, if you're doing any pollarding on roadsides. That epicomic growth is the growth that comes from the trunk or little epicomic buds underneath the layer of the bark. Eucalypts are really well adapted to it. So we can see here that these different species of eucalypts are all showing epicomic growth. And this is something that I love to see. So when I see epicomic growth, it means that the fire was of a intensity and heat that the eucalypts are okay with. If the fire is too intense, that epicomic growth won't happen because those buds, while protected under the bark, it may have been too hot and they've now been damaged. So when I see a lot of epicomic growth all the way up, that tells me that this tree is quite healthy and it's going to come back okay. This is what it's used to doing. It's going to activate all of these buds, and it kind of looks like a feather duster. And so you see all these fuzzy trees as you go out just after a fire. And now it has a lot more availability to get light and get food and nutrients as quick as it can. And then it can start to decide which area is going to be best for growth. Because the fire is now a changed landscape, they don't know if their neighbor's going to be there or not. So they can now see, where do I want to invest energy and make a branch, or do I not want to grow in this area? So this strategy of just like throwing shoots out everywhere is a really efficient way to kind of start again and get that growth happening. So there's a few things that will affect epicomic growth. The species, not every species will do it. And the fire intensity or severity, as I was saying. So that includes how long it was burning for or how hot that fire was. The other thing is the scorch height. So we can see here the base of this tree had quite an intense burn, and then all the epicomic growth is starting from about, I believe that was about 1 meter or so when I was there, as well as any physical damage. So if another tree falls on it or something else happens, then it won't grow. The new shoots are generally pretty vulnerable to herbivory because now everyone's out, they're hungry, and these shoots are going to be one of the first available resources for herbivores to eat. And so some species will challenge that by producing different leaves to their adult leaves. So here on the left, we have new epicomic shoots. These are opposite leaves, and they are bluer than their normal adult leaves, and they're a completely different shape. So these are the leaves that we use in a lot of floral designs. You'll see those eucalyptus leaves. They're beautiful, they last ages, and they smell gorgeous. These are the first shoots to come out, and then later, as the adult leaves develop, then they turn into those beautiful pendulum drooping leaves. So it's just another way to keep themselves kind of ahead of the curve on that one as they're growing up in this new environment. The other thing they will do is they will shed their bark. You can see also on the ground here, there's a lot of new leaf litter, and that's from leaves that got scorched but didn't get completely burnt up. And they've now fallen on the ground, as well as a lot of different twigs and starting that leaf litter substrate again. So because the eucalypts need fire to germinate, a lot of the species underneath them need fire to germinate. They are creating this environment for them to burn. So our trees are not deciduous. They can lose leaves, and they do lose leaves throughout the whole year, just bit by bit. There's not like a specific season. They'll just grow, finish their life, and die and fall down and become part of this ground layer. They will lose any branches, often in storms. We'll get quite a lot of windfalls, and a lot of our eucalyptus as well shed their bark. So we're creating this layer that does want to burn, but it wants to burn quickly. So the important thing about a natural fire in a eucalypt forest is it's normally a really quick, intense burn. Because we have this flammable substrate, we have those oils in the leaves, it's going to burn really, really quickly, burn that up, and then move on with the wind. It's not going to stay smoldering for a long time. And that means that it can just shed the underlayer of any shrubs that have become too dominant, change the amount of light availability on the ground, and move through quite quickly just to open those seeds and move through. When we have more intense weather, when we have less rainfall, we have higher temperatures. So 2019, back then, was the hottest summer in Australian history. Then those fires are going to be larger scale, they're going to be more intense, and they're going to be more severe. And that means that we're not going to see the rejuvenation that we would normally see. And we also see larger areas burning in one go. So that's why maintaining regular fires based on a natural system, and every system will be different, and in the way that was managed by first Australians for thousands of years, was a sustainable way. But now we're seeing some more intense fires, and this is where we're coming a cropper. So these are the oil pores I was talking about, and this oil is what makes that really quick volatile fire. It's also where we see a lot of industry uses. So we have eucalyptus oil, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, and eucalyptus oil production was quite big in Australia in kind of the beginning of the 1900s, and then moved overseas as well. So China is currently the largest exporter. Portugal was up there for a while. A lot of different places will have eucalyptus plantations for oil. Kangaroo Island was the largest exporter, which is one of the places we go on our southern itinerary. There's now only one still that we do go past, but we can see the remnants of a few other stills. The other big industry use of eucalypts are for forestry or timber. So this is the blue gum. This is probably the most common eucalypt you'll see overseas. This is probably the most common one you'll see in a place like California. However, they do have quite a number of different varieties that they grow over there for timber as well as honey production. And these are really fast growing trees. So they're fast growing, they're straight, and they were kind of sold by Australia in the early days of like, use these seeds. But without the responsible fire practices, then it can be really hard to manage because these are not native to that ecosystem. Australia is used to it, Australian animals are used to it, and so they have adapted a relationship that they can deal with fire. But when we have large quantities overseas, or you're doing specific plantation plots rather than a more mixed and diverse assemblage of plants, that's when we start to see some negative effects as well. Generally, these are really fast growing. They're often used for paper production, and that's pretty much the main pulp usage at the moment. The other industry use that we see quite a lot is for honey. Eucalyptus honey is amazing. It's one of my favorite, actually, it's my favorite honey. There's a few different types of eucalyptus honey. We were fortunate enough to, on one of our trips, we were just stopping by a local place for some ice cream, and the local beekeepers were also getting their ice cream fix. You can see the bloke in the background there enjoying his raspberry swirl. And they let us try their honey that they were just on the way to deliver back to town. So that's the nice thing we get, especially in Tasmania. A lot of locals are very happy and proud to share their local produce in this way. So that was pretty special. So in Australia, eucalypts this is where they're meant to be, and this is the environment that we're used to seeing them in. The one that I love to go visit is the Eucalyptus regnans. So it's also called a Tasmanian oak. It's not an oak. It's also called a mountain ash. It's not an ash. This is a common case of Europeans coming over and naming things that seemed familiar but are completely different and are not at all related. So the Eucalyptus regnans is the tallest flowering plant in the world. The current record holder is an individual named Centurion, who is 102 meters tall, and the tallest on record was 114 meters. So they're absolute giants. And we do a walk through the forest here, and you can really get an idea of the majesty of these beautiful trees. You can see underneath that layer I was talking about of leaves and stick and detritus is quite cool down here. This is in Tasmania lucerita. So the decomposition is slow. And this whole layer will be filled with seeds ready to germinate when a fire does move through. This hasn't burnt in about 200 years, and it's probably ready. So some places may want to burn every 5 years or so. This area only wants to burn every couple hundred years. So maintaining older trees and respecting individual fire ecology is really important for these places. And you can see they also shed their bark here as well. Now, it's not just koalas that are relying on these trees, and you can hear this in the canopy when we're walking through this place. You'll hear yellow-tailed black cockatoos and sulphur-crested cockatoos kind of calling through this canopy, but we also see a lot of other species using the hollows of these trees as a really important habitat, as well as our glossy black cockatoos. Now, our glossy black cockatoos, they are critically endangered, and they use sugar gums as their only place for nesting. Unfortunately, we have lost a lot of those trees due to fire, due to deforestation, due to agriculture and like expansion of building areas in certain places in Victoria. But there is a stronghold on Kangaroo Island. And what we do is we often create some artificial nesting boxes. And this creates another opportunity to make sure that we're providing these hollows in these trees for individuals that may need a bit more habitat. So here we have a little female poking out of her home and just taking a look at the surroundings in this beautiful sugar gum forest. And so we really rely on a lot of these eucalypts to create a full ecosystem throughout Australia. There's so many different species, they're in so many different habitats, but it's through these eucalypts that we create a whole world and a whole environment within Australia for a lot of our species. So next time you see sort of a skyline of Australia, you'll see this sort of clustered gappy appearance of the gum trees in the distance. And I hope you have a bit more of an understanding of what that encompasses, the relationship that it has with the land and with the species and with us, and how that we can create this sort of more dynamic eucalypt environment. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikki. I just want to remind everyone that they can submit questions via the questions field in the control panel. What's the difference between eucalyptus and corymbia? Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, corymbia, yeah. So there are 3 genus of eucalypts. So there's Eucalyptus is the main genus, and then there's corymbia and Angophora. So eucalypts isn't really, it's not just above, it's not a family of the tree, which is Myrtaceae. It is a clade, so it's just sort of an arbitrary category that we've put all of these 3 genus together and call that eucalypt. And then eucalyptus is a specific genus with species that are all related to each other. Corymbia are a bloodwood. So they were considered part of eucalyptus until 1990, and then using genetics and other functional traits, they were discovered to be a little bit different. So they were split off. And the same with Angophora, which is that 3rd genus. They've only got about 9 species, but they are quite functionally different. So yeah, it is just a different genus, but classed together as a eucalypt.
Thanks for clarifying that. What happens to a koala if they fall to the ground during their sleep? Are they able to land first on their feet to avoid being hurt?
Right. So it does happen, and it does happen often with young ones, or if there's any sort of territorial display, sometimes during mating as well. The males are up to 50% bigger than the females, so they can kind of not be aware of themselves necessarily. There is like a bit of a fatty layer. They can try and aim for that nice back plate, that cartilage plate. And there is also a theory, their brains actually are quite encased, only about their skull cavity is only about 61% their brain, and the rest is cerebral fluid. And the theory goes that maybe that fluid helps to cushion the blow if they do fall out of a tree. So they are tough cookies and they can handle it. Generally, it doesn't happen that often, but if something gets in the way or a big storm, maybe, but they'll generally try and hunker down.
Interesting. Are the 2 thumbs of the koala a fairly recent adaptation?
I would say not. I don't know the age of their evolutionary break off from the wombat, but we're talking probably 100 million years ago, maybe more. I'm going back through my charts in my brain, but I would say it was a pretty early adaptation in order to be able to climb trees. So those sort of finger arrangements are generally a little bit easier or quicker to adapt compared to like if they had lost a finger completely or completely changed the way that their hand functions. But by having that pentadactyl, that 5-fingered arrangement is pretty common in a lot of our mammals. And so I would say it was a pretty early adaptation to be able to do it. The wombats, which are their closest relative, are kind of all closely clustered together. They're inverted a little bit so they can dig for burrows, but they're all just little tweaks to adapt to their environment.
The cecum appears to be a dead end. How is two-way transport from small intestine to colon accomplished?
Yeah, so it is lined with muscle, and they are able to control what goes in and out of the cecum. They can choose what kind of amount of material they want to decide to spend longer digesting. So generally when they're chewing, they're grinding up the leaves. Things that are really large chunks will pass through relatively quickly, and anything small they're able to divert to the cecum and allow for that bacterial fermentation to really break down those leaves and that pulp a lot more. They can also store water up there. So it is, I mean, we're talking like it's big. So there's a lot of movement that can go on within the cecum. They can store the water, and they can also change what comes out when they are feeding their joeys, because those joeys need to get that gut bacteria from somewhere, and they get it from mum. So they can actually produce some of the bacterial substrate within the cecum out of their cloaca to give to their joeys when they're about 6 months old. Sounds a bit gross, but that's how they start their bacteria, gut bacteria off. So they have really good control over their cecum. Yeah.
Interesting. Is koala flesh toxic or poorly tasting? Do they have any predators?
They have not many predators, really not many natural predators, so they haven't really adapted any defensive structures really, which is why they're happy to just doze. Because they're so high in the canopy, there's not many things that are big enough to get them. If they are on the ground, a dingo may take them, maybe a python or a large snake may have a go, but it's a lot to eat. And then anything like maybe a smaller goanna or birds of prey will take a joey, who is much smaller and easier to kind of get a hold of. The flesh depends. I mean, I have never tried it. It was a food source for some indigenous nations. It depends where you're from, and within certain tribes, as well as with certain individuals, there would be people who would be responsible for looking after sustainable numbers of different species. So you may have a personal totem that is a koala, and that means that yes, others can eat a koala, but you want to make sure that there's enough koalas for everyone. My understanding is they don't taste great, from what I've heard. They're not holding all the toxins in their muscles, so it's not really going to be like in the flesh of them. They are really breaking down those toxins and metabolizing them within their liver. So the liver is working pretty hard, but generally it's not seen as an attractive food source. It's more, I guess, for fur as well, is probably a main hunting use for First Australians because it is so insulating.
Are there many other native trees in Australia?
Yes, there's a lot of different species. Don't have a species count. We have a lot of different native endemic plants to Australia, because Australia has been on its own geographically as an island for so long. A lot of the plants have adapted and are completely different to others that you would find. A lot of our acacia species or our wattles are native. We have some beautiful like banksias and waratahs. There's quite a number of them. Yeah.
Does the eucalyptus honey have a hint of menthol or pine to it?
I think some of them do. I think more the blossom is really sweet. I don't really get that oil flavor in eucalyptus honey. It is this sort of beautiful floral earthy honey. It's quite a clear honey as well. When you look at the blossoms, the opening of the flower is quite large, and on a big blossom, I've been able to dip my pinky in there and get actual just pure nectar. So a lot of the birds and insects, especially the bees, will love those blossoms, and so you get this really sweet nectar without any of the oils that you would associate with the leaves. So it's not like, I'm actually not a huge eucalyptus oil fan. I know a lot of people like the scent of using it as like it's a good decongestion and all that sort of stuff. I can find it a bit strong, but the honey doesn't really have that. It's really sweet. It's beautiful.
Interesting. Let's see. Is there part of the day where koalas are more active?
Nah. I'd like to say that there was this beautiful viewing hour and we can go. It really depends on the weather. It depends what's been going on. It depends how windy it is. So if it's really hot, they might be sprawled out. If it's really cold, they'll be hunkered in. If it's windy, they're going to be hunkered in as well so that they can hold on. Generally, dawn and dusk is just a good time because the temperature is the best. But the koalas can feed at any time of the day. They don't really have like a social hour, so to speak. So often we just try and see them whenever we can. A lot of the places we go, you have a chance to see them in a lot of the eucalyptus trees that we drive past. So you're always sort of looking up, not just for birds, but for also a little grey lump sitting up there. Yeah, it really just depends.
Can you clarify, is a eucalyptus tree the same as a gum?
Yes, yeah. So it's all just, it's like a common name. There have been discussions of like certain species of gum trees because they have the gum, their sap is like more used as a gum, and it was kind of more reserved for eucalyptus as a genus as opposed to Corymbia and Angophora. But now it's just sort of become synonymous and everyone uses it kind of interchangeably. Gum tree, eucalypt, yeah.
Got it. Okay. How have the koalas recovered from the fires and loss of habitat over the last 5 years?
Yeah, they've been facing a lot of stress from fires, from habitat destruction as well. In 2022, extra two in there, they were declared as an endangered species and they hadn't been classed as an endangered species before. We have a lot of different populations of koala along, mainly on the east coast of Australia and then in the southern region as well. And in Kangaroo Island, they weren't actually originally found there, but they are now a kind of security population and they're doing quite well. Unfortunately, during the Black Summer fires on Kangaroo Island, about 53% of the island was burnt, and we lost about the same amount of koalas. We lost about half the population of koalas. They are slow moving and they are up in these trees. It's hard for them to escape from fire in the way that faster moving species or any species with a burrow may be able to escape a fire a lot easier. And so we did lose quite a lot of koalas. We are seeing recovery on Kangaroo Island going quite well. They've always done really well on the island, and that's kind of why it was chosen as a security population. On the mainland, there are small pockets and it is changing. There are a lot of active efforts to help koalas. A lot of funding after the Black Summer fires went into koala habitat restoration, and a lot of, additional food was brought in the way of branches, as well as additional areas for them to be housed. A lot of any injured koalas that were found during rescue efforts were often taken to carers to try and rejuvenate and nurture them back to health and then release them where they were found. So it is a slow process and it is getting there, but really I think beyond fires, the way that the habitat has been fragmented has been quite hard for the koalas to come back. And so there's a proposal at the moment to create more wildlife corridors and connect a bunch of national parks in New South Wales together to create what's called the Great Koala National Park. So that's still in the talks at the moment, something that I've been part of and signing whatever I can sign to help get that conversation along. So there are efforts. I can't say what the full recovery rate in terms of numbers are, except on Kangaroo Island because I'm more familiar with them. They are coming back and I think they will come back. Like a lot of our species are really resilient. They're really well adapted to fire. We just need to give them the space to come back and we need to make sure that we have that habitat that they can come back to.
Can you talk a little bit about the uses for the eucalyptus oil, and is the gum used for anything?
So eucalyptus oil is often used as like an essential oil. So anything that you would use, any sort of strong essential oil for. So whether it is just an aromatic around your house, but it's also can be really quite strong, really quite potent. It can be used as a disinfectant, as a cleaner, as a decongestant, as I was talking about before. Often, you know, as a kid, you'd have a bowl of warm water and a couple of drops of eucalyptus oil, and you just breathe that in under a towel, and you're great. Yeah, so yeah, cleaning product. I'm sure there's some other uses as well. It is quite a versatile, just general strong oil. The sap depends on the species. I don't know if there's any commercial uses that I'm familiar with, but I know that has been used as a way to, it's like a resin really. So it can be used to bind things together. It was definitely used as a way to, like as a glue for a lot of sort of crafting and building applications. You can eat, I think, or am I getting my acacias mixed up? I might get my acacias mixed up, so don't eat some until I check. But there are some gums that are edible as well.
Fascinating. Well, thank you so much for that informative presentation. Just want to share with you that there's a request for you to do another webinar on wombats. So you can
wombats? Okay, well, I have one coming up, so I could do it on wombats.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah. Well, that's the last question we have time for, so I'll hand it back to you for closing comments.
Thank you, Sunny. And thank you everyone for watching and tuning in. I really appreciate everyone's questions. And yeah, if there's any requests, I will definitely be jumping on board with that. I think my next seminar is maybe the week of the 20th of September. And I'm more than happy to talk about wombats, which are koala's closest relative. But yeah, I hope you have a little look at eucalypts in a different way, and really appreciate what a group of trees can do to be like a whole ecosystem and a whole habitat for a space, and how everything is kind of working together. I think that's something that really gives me a lot of joy when I'm walking through these spaces. And I hope you had a little bit of that today. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in today. Please join us again tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I'll conclude the webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.